And welcome to the University of Nottingham PGCE webinar. My name is Helen Spiropoulos. I'm the admissions manager at Stafford Global. And joining us this evening all the way from the university is Dr. Rupert. Good evening to you, Dr. Rupert.
Hi, Helen, and hi to everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
Good, thank you. It was lovely to see you again, and I can see there's quite a lot of you that have joined us. I'm just looking quickly here on my right-hand side. I can see people as far as Qatar, Bahrain, as well as in Jordan, which is fantastic, as well as the UAE. Good, a lovely mix of applicants that are with us this evening. Okay, so how I'm going to conduct the webinar this evening is I'm just going to briefly introduce you to Stafford. I'm then going to hand you over to Dr. Rupert, who's going to take you through the program. And right at the end of the presentation, you will have the chance to type out any questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Rupert or myself. I will be looking at these questions quite carefully because a lot of them are very similar, if not identical. So please do listen out to the very important questions and those very important answers. Okay, so who is Stafford? Now, Stafford was established in 1993, and we're a resource center for distance learning education in the Middle East. Now, we are currently a resource center for 5 UK universities, one of which is the University of Nottingham. Now, we do offer a variety of programs, basically starting from certificates to diplomas, bachelors, MBAs, MECs, right through until doctorates. So we really do have all the type of qualifications that would suit your personal as well as your professional needs. Now, the mere fact that you're here with us this evening means that you have already been in touch with one of our experienced academic consultants. And our role really at Stafford is to assist you throughout the application process and to ensure you get that very important unconditional offer. And we do also offer some administrative as well as some academic support. Okay, so I'm now going to hand you over to Dr. Rupert, and I will join you towards the end of the webinar. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Helen. And hopefully you can all hear and see me okay. And I'm sure Helen will step in and intervene if not. So I'm not just speaking to myself. Anyway, welcome, and great to have so many of you with us this evening. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the university briefly and the School of Education, then get into some detail about the PGCEI course. So what it's for, what it's trying to achieve, and the way it works, the way it's structured, and what to expect. And then we'll talk a little bit about the way to apply for the course and some of those practicalities. And then, as Helen said, at the end, there's a chance for you to come in with any questions. Maybe you'll be adding questions as we go through. And with Helen's help, I'll do my best to answer any of those things. So I hope this is useful and gives you the insights that you need. So first of all, the university itself is a very well-renowned university internationally. It's always very high up in those kind of international league tables. So it's well regarded, it's very recognized, has a good reputation. As the second point here says, it is very much a global university. So not only do we have a lot of international students, but we also have campuses overseas. So currently, for instance, in China and Malaysia, we have campuses of the University of Nottingham. So we have this sort of global outlook, which sits very well with this international education course that we're talking about. And the School of Education within that is very well established and is one of the top schools of education in the UK. So it's very highly ranked in terms of research and teaching, and has a wealth of expertise in-house. So that means, in terms of what the benefit is for you, that the course has been put together by people with a huge amount of expertise, people at the forefront of current research and thinking in education. And also the tutors that work on the course are part of that setup. So you know that you're in safe hands, and this is a school of education that's been around for a long time and is a particular strength within what is, you know, a very strong university itself. So let's talk a bit about the course. So the PGCE stands for the Postgraduate Certificate in Education International. And before we talk about what that really means, I think it's good to reflect on the fact that this is a huge family that you would be joining effectively if you come onto this course. The course has been going for something like 12 years and has grown enormously in that time. So we run this course all over the world. We're talking today about a particular cohort in the Middle East, but we run this on continents all over the world. And we have cohorts all over the world. So that's quite an exciting thought that you're part of this sort of network of educators across the globe. And over those years, literally thousands and thousands of students have passed through the course. So in the Middle East alone, in our cohort based in the UAE, the next cohort we have starting in October will be the 21st cohort. So we've had 20 previous cohorts just in that region alone, and hundreds, well, probably in the thousands possibly, of students who've passed through in those years. So it's an important and exciting thing that you're becoming part of. So what this is a master's level program of academic study in education, and it's aimed specifically at people working in the international education sector. So it has that particular emphasis throughout all of the materials. It's an academic program of study, and it's worth being really clear that it's not a license to teach, or as sometimes people would refer to it as qualified teacher status in the UK, for example. It's not a course that is claiming to give you that kind of licensing or certification. And after all, what counts for certification or licensing varies considerably around the world. So there's no course could claim that in a universal way. So this is a course that isn't a license to teach. It is an academic program of study. And it's what we call a blended learning program. So by that we mean it's put together through a combination of some face-to-face interaction with tutors and some work that you do more independently on your own in the course of a year's study. So normally the face-to-face component would happen literally face-to-face. So twice a year at the beginning and in the middle of the course, the tutor team, we would fly into the UAE, and we put on workshops over weekends. So these don't interfere with your working week. Weekend workshops where we gather the cohort and do that face-to-face teaching with you. So that's the general setup in terms of that blend of learning, together with the online materials, which I'll talk a bit more about. Right now, of course, the world is not quite in its usual state in terms of travel and gatherings and all of those kind of things. So for this coming cohort, we're not going to be able to have that face-to-face gathering, as I expect you can imagine. So what we're doing instead, though, is we're still going to have timetabled slots at weekends where we have a sort of get-together, we have an event. So there'll be a combination on those particular days of live sessions with tutors where you're being taught something live. There'll be times to get together in smaller groups for tutorials. There'll be times to meet with your peers from the course, which is an important part of what we do. And then some things you study more at your own pace. So the idea is, as far as we possibly can, we're trying to replicate those workshops that we normally have, and we're going to have those as online events. So there will still be that live element, but just at a distance. So that's the situation for this coming cohort. And then, of course, in future, we hope that things resolve themselves internationally and we're able to go back to our face-to-face meetings. So the course, I said the course isn't really about licensing you to be a teacher, and that's because we're looking at some of the principles that underpin teaching, and we're not there for assessing your practice in school. So one question people sometimes have is about whether they need to have a mentor in school, whether somebody's going to assess their teaching. So that's not part of this course. We'll talk a little later about how you do need some classroom access, but we're not going to be assessing your teaching. So this is looking at those kind of underlying principles and the big ideas in education. And what this is aiming to do, therefore, if it's not giving you sort of practical tips that you can go and use in the classroom tomorrow, it's about broadening your horizons. it's about giving you some different perspectives, different ways of thinking about things, thinking about the purposes of education and the reasons we do things, and allowing you to step back from your daily practice and to think about things in a different way. And I can testify to this myself. I mean, in these situations, I often recount that when I was a classroom teacher in school myself, I did master's level study. I studied for my MA alongside the job, and it transformed what I did. It completely opened my mind to different ways of thinking about what I did, and it really gave me a step change in my practice. So this is a course, therefore, that will impact on your daily practice through that exposure to all of these different perspectives. So that's broadly what the course is about. So we'll have a think about the structure a little bit. So the structure is across 3 compulsory modules, and this runs across 1 year. In practice, really, you'd be working for about 10 months of that year, but the whole process, including the final marking and so on, spans more or less a year. So you study these 3 compulsory modules, 20 credit modules, and although the modules are compulsory, the way that you engage with them is very distinctive and will be unique to you. So we often use this expression now about the blend that happens on this course, and we talk about how the learner creates their individual blend for the course. So each of you, if you embark on this course, will have a unique experience, because although you follow the same modules, you'll be making choices about some of the units that you study within those modules. And above all, you'll be making choices about the things you write about in your assignments. So under a particular framework or a task that we give you, we'll expect you to choose your own focus with your tutor's help, of course, and you'll be tailoring that to the age phase or the type of schools that you work in. So people on the course will come from all different sorts of backgrounds. Some people are from, say, a British curriculum school, an American curriculum school. You might be in the local public school system. You might be in the international baccalaureate school. And all of these schools have their own distinctive ways of doing things. So you'll be able to tailor your work to that type of school and to the age phase. So the materials are generic enough that they can apply from early years all the way through to the end of schooling. The modules take you on a bit of a journey. So we have a nice logical sequence. So the first module is all about the purposes of education, because when you stop to think about it, and perhaps we often don't stop to think about it enough, there are many reasons why we educate. So we might say, for example, one purpose of education is to give people qualifications so that they can thrive economically and be financially secure in life. That's one thing that education does. On the other hand, you could also say education is about developing a whole person, developing somebody's own interests and giving them a fulfilling and somewhat unique experience. You might say, as another alternative, education is about making the world a better place. And that's what we should be doing. We should be educating citizens of tomorrow who are going to change the world, and so on. So we, there's 3 examples, but we could think very differently about what education's for. And so the first module is all about unpicking different value systems and different ways that we might think about the purposes of education. And we do all of that within an international school context. So the materials are very much also getting you to think about, what do we mean by international school? What are the common features? Because it's a very, very diverse sector. So module 2 then picks up, having established some thoughts about what we think education's for, how do we enact that? So module 2 is about the way that the students learn. We look at lots of different theories of learning, some of which will immediately strike a chord with you, some of which will be quite challenging or very different from what you do. And we look at the teaching strategies. So we look at various forms of teaching, some of the things that you encounter in your day-to-day work to do with, for instance, behavior, assessment, collaborating as students, special educational needs, lots of those issues. So that's module 2. And then module 3, having thought about learning and teaching, brings us to a natural step, I think, which is about, how do we know what students have learned? How can we be sure that what we've been teaching them has been understood? So we have a focus in module 3 about understanding as a concept. And we do that through getting you to do a small inquiry project. So you will pick a focus, again, with help from your tutor, and you will undertake a small scale inquiry into something that's interesting to you under that general banner of understanding. So that's the sort of journey through the 3 modules, which makes a lot of sense. And there's various strands of continuity through that, so that you are constantly developing your own personal philosophy of teaching and picking up on some of the same themes that occur. Each of those modules is assessed by an assignment, which is, it says here 4,000 words, but actually it should probably say 4,000 words or equivalent, because the assignments can come in various forms. So this is another aspect of that personalization I've mentioned. So a lot of people, probably the majority of people, will do a written 4,000 word assignment, but you also have the option to do a presentation that you can present to camera, and various other forms of assessment that are not in written form. So again, that chance to sort of pick the way that you want to do things. Often people come onto the course with a bit of a worry about the assessed work, and they think that perhaps, I haven't worked at master's level before. Am I going to be able to cope with that? Or it's been years since I did any study. I'm completely out of that kind of zone. Or maybe you studied a very different discipline and you're not sure about how things work in education. So if you're feeling like that at all, I want to reassure you and say that's really normal. Every year, probably the majority of students have those slight worries at the start. And what we do is we provide a very structured framework of support for you to help you with that. So you have a tutor that's designated to you. So you would meet them in that first interactive workshop we talked about. You'll know that person, that's your named contact. They will follow you through the course. And what we do with our groups is we offer support at each stage of those assignments. So every module has what we call process work, where you do some work to respond to the materials you've worked through. And that enables us to see whether you've understood things correctly. We also include in that a proposal for the assignment. So we ask you to put together your proposal for what you're intending to do in your assignment, and we give you detailed feedback on that. So you're never going into this in the dark. And additionally, for the first module, we also have a draft stage. So what that means is you can write a complete assignment as a draft. You submit it to us. It's not assessed or marked at that stage, but we give you very detailed feedback, and you can then revise that and submit your final version. So we have an extra layer of support in module 1. So in all of those ways, we build you up and we scaffold that journey towards your academic work. In doing this, you're getting, as we said, 3 20-credit modules, 60 credits. These are 60 credits at master's level. So for some people, the PGCE is the end result in itself, and they have that qualification, and that's all that they want to do. For others, you might see this as just the beginning, because what you've actually got at the same time there is the equivalent to a third of an MA in education. So an MA in education is 180 credits. So you've got a third of that. So if you do want to pursue your studies, and you could do this within 10 years of completing the PGCE, so it doesn't have to be immediate, you can use those credits and join our MA in education, and you've essentially done a third of the work already. And there are various pathways indicated here for more specialist forms of the MA. And if you did one of the more specialist routes, such as the educational leadership, you may only take in 30 credits. But for most people who do the generic MA in education, 60 credits equates to a third of that course. The second point on this slide is emphasizing that this is a very self-contained course. So as well as those workshop opportunities, whether face-to-face or currently online, you have access to our virtual learning environment. And on there, you've got a wealth of materials to work through. Really, really well constructed materials that take you through every module. And this is a very good time to be starting the course, because everything was just revamped last year. So the materials have been quite recently updated. And when I say materials, we've got readings, we've got audio clips, we've got video clips, all sorts of different things, different types of media. and you work through all of those, as well as those, what we might call the core readings and materials. You've got access also to our electronic library. So there's further reading embedded in all of the modules, and simply by clicking through, you have access to ebooks, and you have access to the whole university library online, and you're able to look at journals and everything you need completely free of charge. So you don't need to be going out and buying books. You don't need to have access to university libraries wherever you're living. Everything is there and provided. And you've also got all of that tutor support, which I've hinted at already. So that tutor is always there, as well as the formal moments of feedback around assignments and coursework and so on. You've got our support just if you want to drop an email, if you need to get together online and have a conversation online, video conference, tutorial, we're there, and we're there to support you. Another thing to talk about, I think, is the power of your peers, because one of the beauties of this course is that you're part of a cohort of educators, some of whom will work even in the same region, the Middle East region, will work in different countries and will certainly work in different types of school. As we said before, there are very different school systems. And actually, getting a bit of a perspective, if you, for instance, work in an international baccalaureate school and you're used to that IB school system, finding out what it's like to work in a public school in Dubai, or to work in perhaps a British curriculum school in Abu Dhabi, or any number of other settings, is really revealing. And so we structure lots of things where you can share ideas with each other and sort of network together as well, which is an important part of what we do. So your entry requirements are fairly self-explanatory here. It's a postgraduate course, as expressed in the title. So we normally expect that undergraduate or bachelor's degree. And if English is not your first language, then there may be an IELTS requirement. So we'd be talking about if English is not your first language, or if you weren't educated in English. So you may be able to be exempt from IELTS if you've had your university education, for example, in English at a recognised university. And Stafford's consultants, together with our admissions team, can advise you further on that. You do need to be what we call an established educator, but that's fairly flexible. What we mean is that you need to be somebody who has access to an educational setting, because although we're not assessing your teaching, we're not coming in and scrutinising anything you do in the classroom directly, all of those assignments that you're tailoring to your particular setting are going to be based in things that you draw from practice. So we're going to be asking you in those assignments to refer to examples from your classroom, to talk about some strategies that you've perhaps tried out. And for that third module, the inquiry project, we're going to be expecting that you can gather some data in a small scale way from that setting. So most people are working in a school or another educational setting. You might be working as a teacher, you might be working as a teaching assistant, you might have some other role. Each year we also have a small number of people who perhaps are not employed but are volunteering in an educational setting. And as long as you can get regular access to a class and you can fulfill those requirements, that's still a feasible thing to do as well. And we've added our brackets here because at the moment, with schools just kind of tentatively returning around now in many countries, there's perhaps a mixture of online and face-to-face teaching going on. Maybe in future, perhaps there might be a return to more online teaching. There's a lot of uncertainty. So when we say connections to an educational context, if your context happens to be online because of COVID-19, that's fine, that counts as well right now. And of course it says here day-to-day access to a computer, but I guess you would take that for granted. Importantly here, the second point says non-standard applications will be considered on a case-by-case basis. So although we've said, for example, this is a postgraduate course requiring a bachelor's degree, occasionally we have people who come in without that general requirement, but they've got instead a whole range of experience over years and years of equivalent qualifications, experience in education, things that maybe stack up and give something that we might regard as equivalent that you could use instead. So if you think that you perhaps don't meet any of those entry requirements, but you have a really good case for things that maybe we could look at instead of those that might be equivalent, speak to your Stafford consultant and they will guide you through the process and give you an indication of whether that's likely to be accepted, and then we can take a closer look. So your application checklist is here. These are the things that you're going to need. Most of them are things that you would expect. In terms of personal statement, don't forget to be really clear about your motivation for the course. What is it you're hoping to get out of this? And talk to us about your educational experiences as a professional. What's your current practice that you're working in? What have you been doing in recent years in education? And also, what are your transferable skills? Lots of people on this course have transferred from other careers, and you probably bring with you all sorts of things to do with time management and communication and many other things. So don't undersell yourself. So make sure those come through really strongly. And for your reference, try and explain to your referee clearly the nature of this course. And then that ensures that the things they write about you are probably going to be most relevant for making a case to do with your capacity to cope with this course. So your interest in education, your skills, your experiences, they will be able to signpost to us the most relevant things. So our next intake is not very far away now. It's in October. We have in the UAE, which is our hub for the Middle East region, we have 2 cohorts starting every year. So we have a cohort that starts in October and we have a cohort that starts in March. They run exactly the same course. So one decision to make is whether you prefer to start in October or whether you prefer to start in March. The October cohort, which is coming up really soon, the applications have been really, really healthy, and it's looking like we may be getting relatively close to being full on that, but I think there are still a few places left. So I would urge you, and perhaps Helen, when she comes back in due course into the conversation, might reiterate, but do get your application in as soon as possible, particularly if you are thinking about that October start. As you can see here, the official deadline is very, very soon. That's next week, I think. And we've got a strict limit on places because we have that tutor support for you. We must keep a ratio of tutor to student that makes that possible. So we have to limit our places, and when one cohort's full, we have to close it and pass you on to the next cohort. So it's really in your interest to get your application in very quickly. So for that cohort that's starting next in October, our workshop weekend, which this time, as I said, will be an online one, but still interactive, is scheduled for the 9th and 10th of October. So that weekend, you can expect a whole host of activities on Friday and Saturday that we work through with you that will get you started on the course in general and particularly ready to work on Module 1. And what will then happen is at really strategic points through Modules 1, 2, and 3, when you are at the point of needing the next stage of input, there'll be a scheduled slot with dates that we'll confirm shortly, and we'll have another chance for you to join us for some interactive learning and some more guidance about the next steps. You can see here fee details, and all of that application process, the fees, the way those are paid through installments are handled through Stafford, and they will be able to advise you further on that. But do notice here about this Stafford grant for this particular coming cohort, which has reduced the fee that you need to pay. So that's a really, really valuable incentive there. So that brings me to the point where we get to our Q&A slide at the end. I hope that's given you lots of insights, and maybe it's answered some questions that you may have had. But if you have any others, hopefully Helen will rejoin us now, and she can perhaps field those and put those to me.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Rupert. That was excellent as usual. And I have been looking at the questions in the background in the meantime, so I am able to start grouping them already. Okay, so a very good question from, and excuse me if I haven't pronounced this properly, I think it's I8. My application is a non-standard entry. Will I actually make it for the October cohort? Very good question. As Dr. Rupert has said, the application deadline is actually quite near. It's actually next week. I do encourage you to try and send us all your documents in the next 2 to 3 days. And yes, a non-standard application will actually be looked at as long as we get those documents in as soon as possible. Okay, good. All right. And another question here as well is, I do hold a pharmacy degree and I do want to get into education. I have moved to Dubai last year and I am able to get voluntary work in a school. And my needs or my special interest is in special needs. Is this course eligible for me? And is this course actually for me? Would this be the best course I can take?
Well, that sounds like a good profile to come with. So you've got your bachelor's degree already, and you're thinking of this shift into education. So you'd be in the same kind of position as lots of students on the course. And as we mentioned, that volunteering experience would be sufficient, so long as it's something you can do on a regular basis, and ideally you can get to know a particular class. In terms of your question about special educational needs, this is one of those aspects, I think, where you can tailor the course. So as well as tailoring to your particular age phase that you work in and the type of school, you could also choose to focus your assignments in a special educational needs context. So you could, for instance, if you're writing about learners that you've worked with, they may be learners with special educational needs. And some of the, particularly in Module 2, some of the units of study that you could choose might be guided by that as well. So there are certainly materials around special educational needs, and you could select those units in particular. You might also feel that there are related units. So I'm thinking, for example, of one that we do about, there's a unit to do with spoken language and communication. So that might be particularly relevant for you working with learners with special educational needs. So in all sorts of ways, I think you could select units and this would be a very good course. At the end, it's not going to come out with a qualification that says special educational needs, but it's going to give you a generic qualification that you've been able to shape in that direction. And I think would give you a very good broad grounding in education as well.
Excellent. Okay, good. And Sahalia has already received her unconditional offer. Fantastic. Congratulations. Her question is, when should I expect a tutor to contact me? Is this before or after the 9th and 10th of October?
Really, the 9th and 10th of October will be the sort of formal beginnings of things. So you will be able to access the materials from the very beginning of the month. That's normally the case from 1st of October. So you could start to work through some materials, and then really on that induction weekend, on the 9th and 10th, that's when we would be explaining the tutor groups that you have, and as well as the big sessions that we have with the whole cohort, which might be 100 or even more students. We'll also have breakout sessions in smaller groups, and that'll include a chance to meet your tutor and speak to them. So that would really come in around about that induction weekend, the 9th and 10th.
Okay, and Sanobar's question is, can you elaborate or give some specific examples or options available for the 4,000 word assignment?
Yeah, so there are two ways of looking at this. One is what you're writing about or what you're providing for us, and I suppose the other is the actual format or the medium. So to take the second point there, as explained before, you have an option in each case of a written essay or report, depending on which module you're looking at, or you could do a presentation where in some cases you might film with permission, you might film excerpts in a classroom and offer some voiceover analysis, for example. Or another option sometimes in some of the modules is you do a piece spoken to camera where you present to camera. in all of those cases, the assessment criteria are the same. So the rigor, the academic level, the underpinning from all the academic literature would be exactly the same expectation, but you're just delivering it in a different way. And then the other way to think about those things is the subject matter that you actually are producing. So in each of the modules, you've got a broad task that you're given, but then you can adapt that with quite a bit of flexibility. So for example, in module 2, which is about learning and teaching, you're asked to pick a particular aspect of learning. So maybe a particular learning theory. You might be interested in behaviorist learning theory, for example. So you make your own selection from a really broad range of things you've looked at in that module. And then you relate that and apply that to your school setting. So you might, it doesn't mean that you go and do that. It doesn't mean you need to go and try it out. It means you reflect on what goes on in your setting and relate it to that theory. You comment on the links you can see, the implications, the issues, etc. So that's one example of where you've got a broad task, which is to relate some learning theory to your school setting. But within that, there's a multitude of ways that you could approach that and a variety of ways that you could present that. I hope that helps. I hope that was what you meant.
Okay, I'm a subject teacher, and in some cases, due to the current situation, specialist subjects may be cancelled. Will this be a problem if suddenly I lose access to my online classroom or classroom lockdown?
I think we can be fairly flexible. We can work with you and we can work around these things usually. For our cohort last year, for example, they'd got sort of partway through the course, got to March, and by and large, in most countries around that time, schools closed. So of course, you could say, well, that will throw things into disarray, but we were able, even then, with very little warning, we were able to work with students, come up with alternative ways that they could look at their assignments and ensure that everyone could be successful. So we would always do what we need to do to ensure that you can work through things. So we could either look at some way of slightly adapting the assignment for you, although most assignments are broad enough, I think that you could do them in some way already. And as a last resort, and this relates to a question sometimes people ask about, if there is something going on in your circumstances, whether professional or personal, that really gets in the way of the course, you can suspend your studies for a period of time. There's no penalty involved. It doesn't mean you get lower grades or pay extra money or anything like that, but you can just suspend your studies, resolve that situation, and then return and pick up where you left off a little bit later. So that sort of delay is not normally what people would want to do for plan A, but we've always got there as a backup for you if things do get in the way.
Okay, super. And there's quite a few applicants that have asked a very similar question. Will I be able to work in the education centre or sector, I should say, in Dubai now that I do this PGCE? The question there, and Dr. Rupert has already just touched on it, it's very important, no matter which emirate you're in or which area you're coming from, which region, you need to ensure that you speak to the relevant authorities or your ministries in your country to ensure that this is the right qualification for you. You may also speak to your schools, because a lot of the schools obviously do take this program as well. So it's not a blanket answer. We can't give you that because it does actually depend regionally, internationally, a lot of factors. Okay, so do take that into account before you actually apply for this program. Okay, is there a master's in educational leadership? Yes, there is, and you can obviously get in touch with your academic consultant and we'll be able to give you more information on that. Okay. Does the September 1st deadline apply to those with conditional acceptance offers? Okay, good question. So, Dahlia, I'm assuming you've got a conditional offer pending outstanding documents. The 1st of September deadline is specifically for first time applications. So, if your application is already in the system and you have got a conditional offer, it means that you still need to submit outstanding documents to meet that condition and get your unconditional. So you still have some time to actually submit that. But for brand new applications, your application deadline is next week. Okay, and Vasiliki has actually joined us all the way from Oman. I live in Oman, may I pay in Omani Riyals? Okay, good question again. Vasiliki, you please do get in touch with our academic consultant, and we'll be able to advise you as to how you can pay and the various methods of that. So please do get in touch with us regarding that. Okay, I still don't have a school volunteer position. I have been promised that I will get it. Can I please be accepted for this October intake?
Well, that's a tricky one. We do really need you to ensure that you do have that access to school. We don't want to sort of set you up to fail in any way or to make life difficult for you. So I think it would be worth perhaps speaking to Stafford and talking about how long they might be able to stretch that application deadline and how the places are looking. And in the meantime, really work on getting that position. I think schools in lots of regions will be, students will be returning probably next week, so perhaps that's when you'd get more of a chance of a response. And as a last resort, of course, it may be that you decide to start in March. And in some ways, of course, getting a bit of experience first and then beginning the course is no bad thing, because you'll be tuned in to the school setting and you'll bring to the course a much greater perspective, and then you'll know the questions to ask, the interesting issues. So it wouldn't be a terrible thing if you had to wait, but really we do need you to get that that opportunity to be in school as one of the prerequisites.
Right, absolutely. And as Dr. Rupert has said, please do get in touch with us, and we'll be able to advise you accordingly. A very interesting question from Natasha. You have mentioned that the course is 12 months. So therefore, if we start in October, we will only receive our results in October 2021. My concern is that the academic year in Dubai starts in September. So therefore, I may need some official documentation to be provided.
Yeah, okay, so, and that's quite a common concern. But I'd say, first of all, don't forget what we've said about this not being a license to teach. So it would be relatively unusual that this course was the thing that was going to necessarily clinch that position for you. But if you are in that position, a couple of things that we've done in the past which seem to work okay. One is that the university offers an automatic service free of charge, where you can order at any stage in the course a sort of transcript of your results so far. So before you receive your certificate, you can get a summary of the fact you've passed certain modules. So although it's not a graduation certificate, it's nothing very confirmed, it's an official communication from the university that would show that you had passed those modules. And instead of that, or as well as that, we sometimes, as tutors, will just send a note, a letter from the university that you can use that just confirms that you've completed the course and you've completed the modules successfully, and that your certificate and the formal graduation will be coming in October, but everything has been completed. And I think we found in the past that that seems to be okay for employers, and they understand that there is that sort of time lag. And we have that, you know, it's the same in many ways. It's the same in the UK, where our course here that with our students ends in around July, but often students have actually secured their jobs for the next year several months earlier, and they're doing that on the understanding, of course, that they will be passing.
Okay, good. And Lena's question is again about her degree certificate. I have taken my degree certificate in English. Would I still require to do an IELTS? There are other universities out there that still require that, so I'm just a little concerned.
So we'd have to look at that specific case. But usually if it's a university that the admissions department here recognises, then if you have studied in English, that would usually be okay. But we would just need to have a look at that specifically for you and see where you studied.
Okay, and a question about assignments. How are assignments graded? Do I get a percentage or do I get a symbol?
You get, well, you get neither of those things. You get a number. Broadly speaking, our assignments are graded exactly like master's level assignments. So that means if you do continue your studies and do an MA later, it maps on entirely to the MA system of marking. This is exactly the same criteria. And the broad bands that you have are pass, merit, and distinction. So your work will sit in one of those three bands, assuming, of course, that you've passed. And within those bands, there are various scores that you can achieve. So, for instance, in the merit band, you might get a number that indicates a high merit or a lower merit. So your work would receive a number grade. It's not a percentage, actually, but it's a number grade. And you would know from the criteria we've provided you with, you would know that that sits in either the pass, the merit, or the distinction band. And at the end of the course, your results are taken as a whole and sort of averaged out, and you would receive your qualification with merit, distinction, or pass.
Okay, good. And a very interesting question from Amber. Is there any need for me to attend the university at all during my studies?
No, there's no need for you to attend the university. Normally, as I was saying in the presentation earlier, normally we would have those face-to-face workshops which are in the UAE, and those are compulsory. But at the moment, we're not able to run those, so there is no attendance physically required at all. And there is no requirement to attend the university in Nottingham. You could, in theory, you could come to graduation, and every year some people from PGCI come to England, come to graduation, and it's really, really great to see them. So that might be an opportunity in future where you could come to the university. And of course, if you're passing any time and you happen to be in England at some point and you want to drop by and arrange to say hello to your tutor, that would be wonderful. But there's absolutely no requirement to visit Nottingham.
Okay, and a question from Kamina. I don't have access to a school, but I do currently tutor 4 children. Will this count as a good entry into this program?
Tutoring it might be a possibility in some situations if you worked for a sort of tutoring organization, for example. But generally speaking, if you're sort of tutoring students and you're not in a school or educational setting, it's going to be difficult to relate a lot of the course materials to what you do, and it's going to be difficult to relate the assignments and things and to meet the requirements of the assignments. So I would say really we generally be looking for people who are working in an educational setting, but depending on the form of tutoring you do, it may well be worth us looking at that and considering that. So I wouldn't rule it out. I would say get in touch with your consultants and let's have a look at that.
Okay, and will face-to-face meetings be back for the March group? So if I happen to join in the March intake, would I then have to travel to these face-to-face meetings?
That's a really difficult question. It's an understandable thing to ask. I don't have an answer, I'm afraid. I have to say we don't know at the moment, and it depends, of course, on how things develop around the world, how things relate to travel, whether we're able to have large gatherings again. So there's no guarantee. I would say certainly we know for the October start cohort that isn't going to be offered, and we don't yet know about future cohorts, I'm afraid.
True. Okay. And can I actually complete this program in less than 12 months? Is this possible?
We don't have a fast track on this new version of the program that's just been introduced about a year ago. We don't have a fast track route, so you can't complete the course sooner, but you could manage your own work and you could work through the materials at a different pace. You would still be submitting assignments at the designated intervals. You would still be officially finishing at the same time. But if you wanted to get the work out of the way earlier, then there's nothing to stop you sort of accelerating your progress through the materials. But if what you're getting at is whether you could get the qualification sooner, then I'm afraid you've got to keep on the official track, so you wouldn't get that any sooner.
Okay, you mentioned that the workshops are going to be virtual and that they are a compulsory part of the program. What would happen if I cannot attend a virtual session due to unforeseen circumstances?
Well, we would handle this in the way that we've handled the face-to-face workshops in the past. So they are a compulsory part of the course. If, for example, something is foreseeable, so you know that that particular weekend that you are not going to be available, then what we'd say is you'd need to defer to the next cohort. If you've embarked on the course, you've done the first workshop, for example, and for one of the subsequent ones, something happens, then we would get you to go through a formal process of claiming an exemption from that. And if you have a good reason and it was something unforeseeable, that would probably be looked on favorably and would be okay. And we would want to support you with that, but there would need to be a really good reason and something that wasn't foreseeable.
And if I start this program on an online distance learning basis and halfway through my studies, I want to get to the UK, can I continue this program at the campus on a full-time basis?
No, you wouldn't be able to do that. You could, in theory, continue your studies somewhere else in the world if you unexpectedly moved during the course, moved overseas. You could certainly continue to work on the course, but the course doesn't map onto a full-time program of study here in Nottingham. So this is a course that is only a part-time course, and it runs in this sort of year-long schedule in this way across the world. So although we do have a cohort that meets in Nottingham, it meets really on the same basis as the cohort in the UAE. They have workshops at a particular time, and the rest of the time they work independently on things. So there is no sort of full-time equivalent course.
Okay, and in your opinion, how many hours should I be dedicating to this program in order to pass successfully?
Well, everyone's different, but we tend to think of around about sort of 12 or so hours a week would be a rule of thumb to think about. So that's broadly speaking what you would want to be committing to the course. And some people would do that in one big chunk because of family or professional circumstances. They might say, well, I'm just going to have to do a really long day on a Friday or a Saturday perhaps, and do that at the weekend. Other people would prefer to do a little bit every night, work through in small chunks. Obviously, if people are working part-time or on a voluntary basis, they're going to have more flexibility. But you'd be looking at around about sort of, for a 20 credit module, about 200 hours worth of effort. And broadly speaking, that's going to come out at that sort of 12 or so hours a week. So that gives you a rough indication.
Good, and I think we have covered this question previously, Natasha. With regards to the entry requirement, you must be able to demonstrate that you do have access to a classroom, and it can be on online learning, as Dr. Rupert has said. if you cannot manage to get that at the inception of your application, then perhaps you may have to consider joining the March intake. Please do get in touch with me or your academic consultant, and we can actually give you a bit more guidance on that as well. Okay, and one very last question, which quite a lot of students have actually asked, is will this degree certificate state online distance learning at all? And will this also be mentioned on the transcript?
No, so this is not going to say online or distance learning, and we know that that is an issue sometimes for certain ministries around the world, so it won't say that. So you can be clear about that. And one of the reasons, of course, is that it is not an entirely online course. Normally, it has that sort of blended approach. It's not you just working independently. It is partly a tutored course. So it doesn't say that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, super. So I have managed to group all the questions together. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Very nice questions this evening. And again, thank you to Dr. Rupert for being with us all the way from the UK. As Dr. Rupert has said, the application deadline is coming up quite quickly. Please do get in touch with us. And if you really want to join this cohort, we still have some places available. Let us assist you in getting that application into the university as soon as possible. Okay, over to you, Dr. Rupert, and thank you so much for joining us again this evening.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you very much, Helen, for your help tonight, and thanks to all of you for giving up some time and coming and hearing a bit about the course. It'd be great if we see you on one of our cohorts shortly, so good luck with your application.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, and a good evening.